Everybody, thank you very much for joining. I'm sure perhaps a few more folks will trickle in. We'll just have to miss the beginning. I am David, and I'm pleased to introduce a fellow David Fox-Estrin, who actually came to the very first evaluator event we ever had. A long time ago, we used to have in-person events on campus at GW. And David came there because he submitted proposals to us and had them reviewed and all of that. Now he works at a cool new firm called Impala, which I'll let him tell you more about in a moment, including what his job title is there. It's Director of Partnerships or something like that. Anyway, he was involved as both an author and an evaluator with us, and is now working for a useful resource that can benefit both grant makers and grant seekers when they're doing their research. I saw him recently at a conference that was for funders and saw the presentation, thought it was very interesting. We thought we'd have him come to the symposium here to share with the folks live, as well as recorded folks. We're going to put this up on for posterity. David, if I missed anything, please let me know. But other than that, I'd like to let you take it away. Tell us about what you're doing now.
Yeah, sounds great. From one David to another. Hello, everyone. My name is David Fox-Estrin. As Dave said, I am Partnerships Director with Impala. I'm also joined by my colleague, Laurel Chasse, who's our Customer Success Manager, often helping folks behind the scenes. She'll be helping us today behind the scenes. Really excited to dive into this question around this emerging movement of the digital age of philanthropy that is taking root across the sector, in part because of the work that Impala is doing. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll talk about sort of the origin story that led to Impala. And then we'll actually show you the platform itself. And that way you can get a sense of what we're working on. And I'm happy to share that everyone who joins in today and anyone affiliated with the Unfunded List is welcome to enjoy premium access to the platform until September 1st. So we'd love to get y'all plugged in and see what this thing can do to enhance your grant making or grant seeking work, depending on which side of the sector you are coming in from. And also, we often emphasize that every bit of the platform that you're going to see today has been designed in partnership with real nonprofits, real funders, in response to some of the issues that we have experienced ourselves in the sector. And I think that's a great segue to a little bit about me. I'm sure you're curious, who is this guy that's speaking to you about this stuff? So I've had about a decade of experience in the social impact sector. First, I was on the grant making side of the equation. I was a business strategy consultant at Accenture, and my dream job out of college was to work at a corporate foundation. And so I did make my way over to Accenture's Global Corporate Foundation, where I was advising nonprofits directly and also overseeing a lot of our grant making and evaluation work. And then I shifted over to build upon a nonprofit I started when I was a student at Duke. And it was a nonprofit focused on countering different forms of identity-based violence and hate all across the world. And that is the project that I was submitting rejected grants to the Unfunded List to get some feedback on and to hopefully boost my fundraising efforts. So that's how I got into the mix with the Unfunded List in the first place. And then after that, I was on the evaluator side. But like often is the case with nonprofit fundraising, it was a grind. It was challenging. I navigated lots of barriers, paywalls for data that would have been really helpful for my fundraising work. Just a lack of access to the tools and resources that I think could have been really helpful to my work. And frankly, I wish I had a tool like Impala in my hands maybe 3 to 5 years ago, and then I would still be attending the symposium in your seat rather than the seat that I'm in today. So I'm very happy with where I am and the work that we're doing. Before we go any further, I would encourage folks, feel free to chime in the chat. Laurel will be monitoring any questions that come through as we go, trying to answer there. And then also we'll have time for Q&A at the end of our time together today. So feel free to chime in, share your name, maybe the organization that you're representing. I'd be very curious to know if you are on the grant seeking or grant making side of the equation. That is helpful to sort of guide where we may emphasize some of our time together today. So feel free to do so. You're welcome to come on video or you can hang out in the background as well. All good. My video will be on for sure the whole way through. But I'd love to hear from you definitely by the end of the session, both questions as well as any sort of comments or feedback about the platform and about this work. So let's start a little bit about where Impala came from and what it's all about. Thank you, Isabella, for sharing that you're on both sides of the equation. Awesome. Uh, so Impala emerged from our CEO, Shachar Bruckner, and Simon Dixon, our COO, who were at the Harvard Kennedy School doing their master's in public policy. And Shachar actually had a nonprofit, and he was doing the typical grant-seeking work that one does. And he just noticed it was really hard to get access on data about different grants that could have informed his work. And then in the process, he learned that funders also have a really big challenge in terms of accessing the data on nonprofits who they're evaluating, right? That due diligence piece of the equation. We know that, for example, public data, 990 data for all those American nonprofits here, for those who are in the American sector, those entities submit their 990s every year. So it's technically public, but it's not really public. It's very difficult to access. And spending time in a 990 form for those of us who've either reviewed them or submitted them, it is not something I wish upon anyone. So Shachar had the idea to build a platform for both sides of the sector, both nonprofits and for funders, that could serve both of their needs and have aligned incentives where both sides would want to contribute more data to the platform and enrich everyone's evaluation efforts to seek and access and provide resources. So that's essentially the origin story of where Impala came from. And I'm really happy to share that it was launched in partnership with some really wonderful funders, specifically in the state of Massachusetts, and now increasingly across other funder networks and nonprofit networks all across the United States. So clearly there is a need out there and a hunger for something like this. And so we'll talk more about that as we go. But I think it'll be really helpful to actually shift into the platform itself, and that'll reveal a lot more. So I'm going to begin and share my screen so folks can get a sense of what this platform can do. All right, so I'm sharing my screen now. Laurel, can you give me a thumbs up if you see what I'm sharing? Awesome, thank you for that. All right, so this is Impala's homepage. We go to impala.digital, and then I'm gonna go ahead and log in. And so what Impala is letting us do is see the profiles of any nonprofit or funder all across the United States. Any entity that has ever submitted an IRS 990 form, they're already here in the platform. Their profiles are waiting to be claimed, but they're already filled with lots and lots of really helpful information for both grant seekers and grant makers. This is the way to think about it. Is if you're familiar with GuideStar or Foundation Directory Online, this is like both of those platforms combined, and then layered on top of that are even more powerful premium tools and features, something like that we call ecosystems, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So we can see that we have almost 3 million organizations that for which we have data on the platform. Again, any entity that has submitted that 990 form. And so we're going to take a look at a nonprofit profile and see what we can learn. We're going to look at a funder profile. I'll show you how you can actually build something like a prospect list or a nonprofit watch list if you're on the funding side. So it serves both sides of the sector. And then I'll take you into ecosystems, and you'll be able to see what you can do there as well. All right, so let's start by taking a look at a nonprofit profile. I'm going to show you a nonprofit that's based here in Boston, where I'm tuning in from today. So the organization is called Samaritans. They are a really wonderful social services organization focused on mental health and crisis response services here. And so here's what we can learn about them on their profile. They're based in Boston. They're women-led, so they opt into sharing an identity-specific leadership tag. So whether they're women-led, BIPOC-led, LGBTQ+-led. We've got their 990s in the system all the way from 2013 through to 2022. And that's what's flowing into their financials tab, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then we have their digital real estate, their website, social media. So if you're a funder, this is like a one-stop shop to learn all that you can about this nonprofit without having to make a single phone call, do any further research. You're not Googling around wondering, is this the right website? Is this the right social media? It's all here. And we've got their 501c3 status as well as the EIN. So now let's talk about the three main tabs on a nonprofit profile. We've got the financials, the people, as well as impact. So let's start with the financials tab. So the way I would love for folks who are tuning in to think about this is we can be wearing three hats right now looking at this profile. One is maybe I'm a funder who wants to conduct due diligence on Samaritans. Maybe I'm considering offering them a grant or inviting them into a grant seeking pipeline. Or maybe I'm a nonprofit and Samaritans is one of my peers, or dare I say competitors, and I want to learn what I can about my peer, which could help my fundraising and my strategy development work. Or third, if I am Samaritans itself and this is my profile, I can bring this information into a board meeting, use it with my board members, stakeholder engagement, and this can inform our strategic planning work and our fundraising. So let's see what we can learn. First off, we see the story of the organization. Its operating budget is increasing year over year. We love to see that. And then we get to our first interesting visual, like truly interesting visual here, which is what we call funders change. And this allows us to see the funders who have entered and started supporting this nonprofit in green, as well as the funders that have exited and stopped supporting this organization year over year. And I can actually click in and see who those funders are that have started and stopped supporting the organization, and as well how much they gave in that particular year. So again, who entered, and then I click over to here to see who exited. Why is this important? I want to look for any intriguing or concerning trends about the giving. If I'm a funder, I might be curious of like, why are folks leaving and stopping supporting this organization? Or if I'm a nonprofit, I want to look and see if I notice any particular funders beginning to support this kind of cause. And that's a good segue for what I'll talk about moving forward, which is when I am seeking any grant, when I was seeking grant funding, there were three things that I was always looking for when evaluating a potential funder. I was looking for number one, alignment. So does the funder support my mission and cause area? Two, capacity. Do they give at the level that I need for any particular program? And then third, relationship. Do I have any way, any bridge into the organization that allows me to actually have a shot? So if I can score on all three of those areas and I rate an organization, a funder highly, I'm going to bring them towards the top of my list. And so you're going to see how throughout the platform we're able to do that. And funders change is one area to get a leg up on that kind of information. So now as I scroll down, we can see other data visualized, the revenues and expenses, assets and liabilities. And this is all really interesting, familiar information related to the 990, sourced from the 990. We see the revenues and expense breakdown with all the different source areas that would have been listed on the 990. And so again, if I'm a funder, this is really intriguing to me to evaluate the organization, both from a revenue and expense side. But things start getting really interesting when we get over to the bottom and we look at the funder summary. So these are all of the funders that have ever supported Samaritans. We see who they are, how much they've allocated, over what timeline, and how many grants. And as I look at this list, anywhere that I see an organization that is intriguing to me, like maybe the Boston Foundation, maybe I didn't realize that they supported this kind of cause area, I can actually add them to a list. And this is the beginning of us building our intelligent prospect list right here in the platform. So if a list doesn't exist, I can, for example, say prospects summer 2023, and then start adding those organizations to that list as we go. We also can see the full list of all of the grants that this organization has received, from who the funders were, any particular cause, or any description from the 990, and how large the grant was. Again, we're looking for that capacity match, and whether it was routed through a donor advised fund. And if we see that the grants are coming from a donor advised fund, I'm not going to prioritize that funder on my list, because donor advised funds are a lot trickier to engage. They tend to be anonymous. So that's a starting point for us to get a sense of things here on the financials tab. Next, I want to show you the people tab. And we know philanthropy is very relationship driven. So there's a couple of things that are valuable about the people tab. I can see anyone that's ever been listed on the organization's 990 in terms of the executives, the board members, the employees. And I also can filter by last reported compensation. So again, if I'm a funder, this is a really helpful spot to see what the compensation of the top paid employees and leadership of the organization looks like. And another thing for those nonprofits tuning in here, this is really helpful for board development. Again, I can make a list of my peers, partners, competitors, and take a look and see who are serving on there among the leadership of those organizations, and they might be added to my short list for folks who I could engage for my own board development purposes. The last thing I want to show you here on the nonprofit profile is the impact tab. And I like this the most because this is where you as a nonprofit get to share your impact story on your own terms. So you get to opt in to share what are the cause areas you support, the populations you serve. You can identify your key impact metrics. We know funders want to see those specific measurable outputs from your work, so you can list them there. And then finally, you can identify the programs that you do to make a difference in the world. Not only do they then connect to a dynamic map on the right, but this is the first example that I like to share of where we want to make sure that you are getting way more than you're giving in terms of your relationship with Impala. So what do I mean by that? If you complete your programs, they will also appear on all of your funders' profiles as well. So just like you might be taking a look, as if you are a nonprofit, taking a look at peer profiles, peer nonprofit profiles, funders are definitely also doing the same and checking out other funders that they know and work with. And so they now may see your program, and that might lead to an organic process of looking at your profile, learning more about you, and maybe you might be contacted by that particular funder. So definitely worth your while to complete the programs on your profile. So that covers the three main tabs of a nonprofit profile. And now I want to bring us over to a funder's profile. So in this case, let's take a look at the Bar Foundation. So here we go. We could take a look and see what's different here. So they also have financials, people, and impact. But the thing that I'm most interested in here is the funding and funding overlap tab. So let's go ahead and take a look there. So over here on the funding tab, we can see some really important information that's going to help us evaluate if this funder could be a good fit for us. And also, if we do determine it is, to right size our ask, right? We don't want to waste time asking for the moon and this funder's like, nope, that's definitely outside of the range. We don't want to waste your time or the funder's time. So this is a win-win. So let's talk about this. Number one, I want to call attention to this unique metric here that we call average grantee reliance. So what does that mean? This means that the typical grantee of the Bar Foundation typically gets about 9% of its revenue from the Bar Foundation. So for those nonprofits that are listening today, if you were to apply, let's say, for $200,000 from the Bar Foundation, but your budget is $400,000 or $300,000 in a given year, then based on this average grantee reliance, you're going to be way surpassing what their normal risk tolerance or risk profile is. So you may want to reconsider whether this is a good fit for you. At the same time, you also can see that median first, second, and third-year grant amount. So from a capacity perspective, we can evaluate if this is a fit for what our funding needs are. And also, we can right-size our ask. We can add into the LOI that we're seeking maybe $150,000, and we know that we're approaching this from a data-driven perspective. We don't want to go way above or necessarily way below these particular metrics. And we also see here metrics related to longevity of grantees in this funder's portfolio. So we know what kind of journey we might be up for. We would want to prioritize those funders that have a multi-year relationships because one and dones are just less bang for your buck. We know time is money as you're applying to potential funders. So we can see that more than half of their grantees typically stick around for more than 1 year. And we actually can visualize that in the portfolio right here. We see how many stuck around for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so on. So this really gives you gives you a leg up to evaluate if this funder is really worth your time and effort to reach out to or perhaps submit an LOI. Then similar to funder change, we have nonprofit change, and this is showing us who are the nonprofits that the Bar Foundation started and stopped supporting in any given year. We can click in and see who those funders are. And again, we're looking for those trends to see if there's something that adds up for us. We want to, if we're a nonprofit, we want to see, are there nonprofits here that we recognize that are related to our mission and cause area? And then we want to take a look and see how much those nonprofits are actually earning in that first year, and if that's in our realm of what we need. We also can look and see who is out on the portfolio, and that might indicate that this funder is moving away from a particular sector. So that's another helpful area for us to take a look at. So now if we scroll down, I want to call attention to these three different elements here that all interact with each other. So on the right, we see all of the grants by size, and based on those median numbers, it does make sense that we see most of the grants from the Bar Foundation are in this 100 to 500K range. And then further down below, we see that there's over 300 grantees that have ever received support. So again, if I'm a nonprofit, I want to look and see, do I see folks that look and sound like me? and we can learn about the average grant size among other metrics. And then if we are a funder, we can take a look and see who the Bar Foundation is supporting and maybe find organizations that we would want to add to a list and keep an eye on and maybe invite into a a grant pipeline. We also see all of the grants that have ever been given, so almost 1,700 grants. I want to look and see if there's precedent for grants that make sense for me by looking at the grant description, who was supported, and the grant size. But looking at 1,700 grants is going to take a while, right? So I want to go back up to this grants by size area, and let's say I'm going to be asking for maybe 50 to 100K. That's based on my needs. So I actually can click that right there. And then I can scroll down and see that the list that I'm focused on is a lot more manageable. Instead of 1,700, it's closer to 200. So that gives us a much more manageable list to explore. And hopefully we've just saved you a bunch of time for those of you that are grant seekers on the call. Next, I want to show you funding overlap. So this is essentially the idea that there are a lot of funders out there that are supporting the same groups of nonprofits, whether they know it or not. So that is what we call funding overlap. And so let's take a look at a particular example. For example, we see here that when I click in, I see that both the Bar Foundation and the Klarman Foundation together support the same 61 nonprofits for a combined level of funding of $62 million. This suggests that there's significant alignment across different cause areas, perhaps. And so if I'm a nonprofit, I'll take a look at this list, and maybe I'm a grantee of the Bar Foundation. And so this is really intriguing to me. I may see organizations that are similar to me. So then what I'm going to do is if I have a good relationship with my maybe grants manager, portfolio manager at the Bar Foundation who gave me my grant, I may knock on their door and say, hey, I see on Impala that your grant making is so well aligned with the Klarman Foundation. Would you mind making a warm introduction for me? And so that's how we get towards that relationship piece here, right? So we're able to now use data to pose a question to our existing funder, and maybe they can be that warm bridge, warm lead to a new potential funder that we may not have otherwise been aware of or thought of. Worst case scenario, they'll say, no, we're not going to make that intro for you. But at the same time, you're going to look like a data-driven fundraiser and someone who's on the sort of cutting edge and trying to do what's right by your organization. Now, if we're a funder, let's say we're the Bar Foundation, this is really interesting to me because I want to see who I'm overlapping with, because that might reveal an opportunity to collaborate with another funder, do a co-funding, a joint pipeline, a joint grant making opportunity, which is a win-win for both nonprofits and funders, maybe some data sharing. So that's something that for those funders that are here, you may want to take a look and see who you are overlapping with on the platform. And the other thing that you can do is also take a look and see what other funders have supported a particular nonprofit, and then reach out to them and say, hey, can you tell me about this potential nonprofit organization? All right, so we covered both a nonprofit profile and a funder profile. And as a reminder, we started here on our search feature, which allows you to search among any particular nonprofit or funder entity and access their profile. What I've just shared with you is free and will always be free on Impala. And that's a big part of what, when we talk about this movement to democratize access to data in the social impact sector, this is it. Right? The other providers out there in the sector often put up paywalls to prevent you from seeing this data, but it's supposed to be public, right? So whether it's your own profile for your own organization or searching any other nonprofit or funder, you are able to access this information, and we're never going to put up a paywall in front of this sort of stuff. That's sort of aligned with our core values. So next, I want to show you our lists area. So you remember we were sending organizations to maybe like a prospect list or a nonprofit watch list. You can see that I have a lot of organizations that are lists that are listed here from different calls that I've been leading lately. So let's say from like a funder perspective, we want to take a look at, let's say we cared about addressing homelessness in a particular geography or maybe all across the United States. So I hopped on a call with a funder, and together we used the platform to build this list of nonprofits that they were really interested in. And what's cool about looking at a list is I can share this with anyone else on my team and build a nonprofit watch list or a prospect list of potential funders with anyone on my team. And in addition, We can also add comments. So if for whatever reason we want to say, this could be a great candidate for what we're looking for, or maybe not, or I have a relationship, members of your team and members across your board could be given this list, and then they can chime in there. And then once you're ready, if you want to export any of this data into a spreadsheet, you're more than welcome to. We're not trying to trap you on the platform. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that ability as well. And in the future, we're going to integrate with lots of other CRMs. So that way, this is really a seamless process across different platforms that you use. But the important thing that I would emphasize about lists here is that this was an idea that emerged from a couple of our users around November. And then I remember very clearly, we made the decision that we were going to build this into the platform. And by January, we already had this live on the platform. So that sort of gives you a sense of how quickly we move and how we actually listen to user feedback to improve the platform. So anyone listening here today, based on your questions, your feedback, we love to make those dreams of yours come true. So definitely don't be shy about sharing your feedback. And then I just want to give you a sense of what this looks like for maybe a prospect list. So here's an example where we see different funders. On the opposite side, also, these are funders who support those organizations who address homelessness. And we can see we've got some of their financials here as well, that median grant data point that was really helpful for us a few moments ago on the Bar Foundation's profile. So all that is here and waiting for you as well. Now I want to shift us over to the premium side of our platform, which is our ecosystems tool. And ecosystems allows you to see any part of the social impact sector based on criteria that you define. We can see any combination of nonprofits and or funders. And so let's see the 3 different ways that we can do that. We can build an ecosystem based on nonprofits. And so for those of you that are grant seekers on the call, if there's nothing else that you do following this call, I highly recommend to A, hop on the platform, B, make a list of those nonprofit peers, partners, competitors, and then come over here to ecosystems and then type the names of those organizations in here. That's going to let you see all of the funders of your peers and partners and competitors. And if you ever wanted a great shortcut to the best prospect list, that's going to be it. Because more often than not, those folks, those funders are giving to the cause area that you're aligned with, to the capacity that you need. And you probably know a few folks that are aligned in the sector. So I highly recommend doing that. On the flip side, if you are a funder and maybe you have a grant pipeline coming through and you've got a list of 10, 20, 30 nonprofits that you want to compare against each other, you're able to do that here. And then we also can build an ecosystem based on funders. And so let's say we're a nonprofit and we've got a list of 10, 15, 20 funders that we're interested in engaging. We can now compare them, prioritize, rank them accordingly. And then lastly, we can build an ecosystem based on landscape markers. So I'm going to click in and we're going to build an ecosystem right here in real time together based on these landscape markers. And so how do we do that? We can combine geographies, so city, county, state, or all across the United States. We also can look at particular cause areas. So these align with the IRS's NTEE codes. So things like education, health, human rights, and we can click in further detail if we want. And then we also can add in keywords. So let's say we want to show all organizations that definitely have the word racial justice in their name or in their mission statement. We're able to add in one or multiple keywords that allow us to further refine, combining with or just entirely focused on those keywords. That also was a recommendation from our users, so we were able to jump on that in a matter of a few weeks. So let's go about doing this together here. I'm based in Massachusetts, so let's go ahead and do Massachusetts. We can do, again, city, county, state, multiple if we wanted. And then let's look at the cause areas. I'm going to select arts and culture for today. We know we have a really robust arts and culture sector here in Massachusetts. So maybe I'm a Massachusetts arts and culture funder and I want to see what this sector looks like. Or I'm a nonprofit that works at a museum or a youth arts organization. These are the sorts of things that I would input. I'll leave the keywords blank for now. Then in the advanced criteria, we can do some fancier things. But the one thing I do want to do for now is turn off the DAF grants. As I hinted at before, DAF grants can be a bit of a black box. So I'm just going to pull all of those out. And if I go backwards, actually, I want you to see this. If we start just at Massachusetts, it's showing us that we're searching among over 62,000 nonprofits and over 12,000 funders in this particular area of the state of Massachusetts. And so now when I add in arts and culture, that funnel gets further refined. And so we're going to be taking a look at about 3,000 nonprofits and about 2,300 funders. So again, this is much more focused and allows us to see what we need to see, whether we're funders or grant seekers. So I see that this ecosystem, the Massachusetts arts and culture ecosystem, has about $620 million going into it from 2,300 funders to those almost 3,000 nonprofits. This is nice to see at a top level, but I actually want to see much more actionable and insightful information. So we're going to quickly explore the funding side and the nonprofit side of the ecosystem and see what we can learn. So let's go to the funding side. And so right away, we can see the story overall in this sector. I might be a funder in this area, and I want to know, is the funding that's going into arts and culture growing or shrinking over time? Well, I can see that the overall trend is an upward trajectory. I like to see that. And then now you're going to begin to see sort of the same graphics that we showed you on profiles, but now aggregated across the entire sector. So it's like combining hundreds, if not thousands, of profiles to show us the data. So we can see who are the funders that are in or out on arts and culture in Massachusetts. Again, I can click in and see different funders. So say, maybe we didn't realize that the MacArthur Foundation was a key funder in this sector or just entering. So now we might add them to a prospect list, or the Adelson Family Foundation or the Kaiser Foundation. We're able to highlight and again, add them to a list, and we have other metrics to guide us to let us know if this could be a good fit. And we also can see who is out. And now I want to show us the grant distribution, the same idea as before. We see almost 14,000 grants in arts and culture in Massachusetts. And let's say we're looking to get a program off the ground and we're looking for 10 to 25,000 or maybe 25 to 50 again. And that list becomes a much more manageable 1,300 grants. And now we can look through, search through those grants, see if there are funders that are supporting peers of ours or things that align with our particular needs. So I see the Ford Foundation or United Way of Massachusetts. I may add them to a list as we go. Next, I want to show you the comparison tab, and this is really, really powerful, allowing us to benchmark and compare those funders that we might be considering, or as a potential source of support, or if we're funders, we can get to see a who's who of who's engaged in the sector, who are our peers, and how does their giving compare to ours. So we can see, we looked at the Barr Foundation, right? They're number 3 on this list, and there's a couple of metrics that I want to highlight in particular. We can see that about 6%, so this is a metric called ecosystem focus, and this is telling me what percentage of all of this funder's portfolio is going to arts and culture in Massachusetts. What percentage are they focused on this sector? So we see that Barr is allocating about 6% of its giving to arts and culture, whereas we see that 9% of the portfolio of the Boston Foundation, our large local community foundation, is going into this sector. So this gives us a sense of alignment. And that means I'm definitely going to include these funders on my prospect list if I'm an arts and culture organization in Massachusetts. So this helps us focus on those that are aligned with our needs. The other thing that I'll highlight is this other one here called grantee change. And if this number is positive and green, this is suggesting that this funder is welcoming new nonprofits into their portfolio. It is a sort of estimation of their willingness to take unsolicited support. So that is something that it's worth keeping an eye on and including in your research efforts. There's a lot of other metrics here that you could look at. And I just want to let you know that if you just hover over the names of the columns, you'll get a definition of each of those, and you can explore that on your own time. For the sake of time today, I won't go into the overlap section. We did cover this on the Barr Foundation's profile, but this is the same idea. It's showing us those funders that are supporting the similar groups of nonprofits, whether it's based on the number of grants or total funding. And so if I'm a funder, this is really interesting to see who is overlapping with each other in the same sector that I'm engaged in. And we could, perhaps if we're part of an arts and culture Massachusetts funding circle, that's the place that I would go to see who else maybe I want to invite into that funding circle. Now I want to shift us, because we looked at the funding side of the ecosystem, and now I want to shift us over to the nonprofit side, because there are really helpful use cases for both sides of the sector. So I actually want to go straight to the comparison section. And so we're looking at, again, almost 3,000 nonprofits. And so here they are. We can compare organizations based on their financials, based on their staffing size, what proportion of the funding that they're getting in arts and culture and mass, and other funding metrics in terms of whether they're gaining or losing funders. So here, if you're a nonprofit, you can benchmark yourself relative to other leading organizations in the sector. If we're a funder and we're decided to start a new portfolio dedicated to this cause area, we can come in here and see who's who and maybe find organizations that we would want to support, add them to a list, and that may be the beginning of us seeing who we want to invite into our pipeline. But the other thing that's interesting here is the growth section. So comparison is showing us a snapshot in time, but growth is interesting because this is showing us who are the fastest growing nonprofits based on their financials as well as their staff growth as well. So this is really cool because if I'm a funder, I want to see who's operating at the frontier of innovation, who's growing the fastest. Maybe if that aligns with my values, that's where I want to allocate my funding. On the other hand, I also can click down here into the insight section and see where is money going based on geography. So which cities are getting the support in arts and culture, and we can sort of see any particular trends that stick out to us. We also can look at the particular sub-cause areas in arts and culture as well. But I want to also highlight funding distribution. This is similar to the concept of showing like income inequality. We're showing at times philanthropic inequality. So what do I mean by that? This is showing us, let's just focus on one column as an example. We see here, these are nonprofits. There's 121 nonprofits out of all the nonprofits in the sector who have just 6 to 10 funders overall, institutional funders, not individual, like, folks who might write a check. And we also have 376 nonprofits that have just one institutional funder based on the data in their 990s. And if we look at the yellow area, this is what we call the tail. And so we can see that 86% of all of the nonprofits are in the tail. 86% of nonprofits in mass arts and culture have fewer than 10 funders, and they only get 24% of all the funding in this sector. So there is that gap. And so for those philanthropists on the call today who want to sort of make a difference from a systemic change perspective, you might be able to ask some questions about, who are these nonprofits that are on the edge? Can we maybe give them a leg up and help them get out of the tail and over to the other side of the sector? And similarly, we see here this red dot is telling us the median number of funders for nonprofits in this sector is 2. That just gives us a very sobering fact of the sustainability of organizations in this particular sector. And based on what Laurel and I see across sectors, this is not uncommon. So for those, and especially I know Dave cares about this sort of stuff of understanding systemically what's happening, across sectors, this is a really helpful place to take a look at. So if I were starting a new portfolio as a funder, maybe in arts and culture, what I would do is I would come to growth and I would see who are the trailblazers, maybe add some of those to my list. And then I would come to the funding distribution section and then click in and see these organizations, see who they are, add them to my list as well, and then do some further due diligence on their profiles from there. So we covered a lot of territory. There's one more thing for those funders on the call as well. I just want to give you a quick sense of this concept of my portfolio. So now I'm switching as if I was the Bar Foundation. Any funder who comes to the platform, you also will see this section called My Portfolio, and it lets you see your entire ecosystem as a funder, right? We know funders, you have your entire ecosystem unto yourselves. And so you can see where your funding is going geographically, the causes, who's overlapping with you. And then we have a lot of information about your grantees, from who's growing the fastest to comparing them like we just showed you. And we can see, the distribution of your grantees based on their operating budgets. You can see how much cash is in the bank for your grantees based on their 990s, among other things as well. So just a heads up for those funders on the call based in the US who submit 990s, this is waiting for you as soon as you log into the platform. So we covered a ton of territory. If you're feeling just a little bit overwhelmed, that's totally understandable. We've got plenty of time for questions and feedback. Would love to get sort of a vibe check otherwise to see how this this experience has resonated so far. Yeah, David, I see you say I drink strong tea. This is my matcha latte. So I'm powering us through here. But yeah, it's really a joy to share Impala with the Unfunded List community. I'm a big fan from both the evaluator perspective as well as someone who has submitted proposals to be evaluated. And I'm happy to share that anyone in this community is welcome to have that full premium access to Impala until September 1st. So all across the summer, whether you're a funder or a nonprofit, whether you're in the United States or out of the United States, you're welcome to that. I'm going to drop our email in the chat. It's support@impala.digital. So in case you want to reach out to us, if you'd like to help getting set up on the platform, please email us there. And then besides that, the one other thing to highlight is that there's a lot of tools and resources available on our website, and we host monthly lunch and learns as well. So if you want to kind of take things at a slower speed, you're also welcome to do that as well. So I'll pause there, Dave. I'll pass it back to you. Feel free to ask any questions that have come up for you, and everyone else, by all means, chime in too.
Yeah, I have a bunch here, starting with Pius's, who is on the call here, who is also both, like you, he's been reviewed and submits proposals. And I know, Pius, feel free to hop on, turn your audio on or whatever. You're registered in Uganda, I think. You probably don't have a C3, but potentially could be funded by a funder in the US, right? So can you talk just a little bit about how, because we do have a large number of international folks who applied this round in future rounds, how they'll use the platform, and also, are there any plans to go beyond just 990 filers?
Yes. So wonderful. Great question. So for those folks who are tuning in or later tuning in who are outside of the United States or not entities that submit 990s here in the US, number one, you can join Impala today under the same terms that we talked about. And you can, at minimum, take advantage of understanding U.S. philanthropy. And we know a lot of philanthropy is cross-border, so you're able to get access to the philanthropic ecosystem in that way and access that data. However, while we do have plans to roll this out across the world, probably first Canada, Israel, Europe, but then going further beyond, you cannot yet have a profile to sort of amplify your particular work on the platform. So for now, you're sort of taking in data and using that to inform your fund, maybe your prospect research and the funders that you may choose to reach out to and engage. But if you're a grant seeker outside the United States, you won't yet be able to have, your organization, maybe based in Uganda with a profile just yet. But it's definitely on our roadmap in the coming year or two. And then for the funders, the same deal sort of applies. We definitely want you on board, but you won't yet have a profile yet on the platform.
I think Canada was tailor-made for this sort of thing. I imagine they have all the paperwork.
Yeah, right. The key thing is that Canada's way of it's, if you've seen a 990 form, it's very complex, but it is standardized.
Maybe you.
Right? Sorry.
I've looked at a lot. I read them like a child's story. I've read thousands and thousands of them. But yeah,
and I see Margaret probably has.
It's like a complicated tax form.
Yeah. So, but for us to go country by country and mapping and aligning every single country's different standards of tax reporting, it's a little bit of a project. So we're prioritizing. We want to get the U.S. ecosystem right, obviously, because the bulk of philanthropy is flowing from here as well.
Yeah, and there are probably funders who are in fact not American. Their money is here, and so they're registered here. So there's many ways that even now, with it being just 990s, an international fundraiser or grant seeker could use this quite efficiently. Your founder is not from the US either, so I imagine that you'll follow through on your international stuff. Margaret, did you?
I do.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, I just had a question because you mentioned that you pull the info from the 990s, and I noticed that the IRS website is backed up to like 2021 for 990s. So is there other sources of information that you're also pulling from to give us more up-to-date information than we could get, by looking at those 990s individually, or is it reliant solely on the 990s? I'm just curious because it's a problem I think all of us are having in some research.
Yeah, and so it's a unit. It's a great question, and it aligns with what Dave was asking also before. So all the infomediaries like Candid and ProPublica, et cetera, and including Impala, we are all dependent to a point on the IRS, and we know the IRS has its data lag, and we're not betting on them to catch up all that fast, right? So given that issue, what we do is we make it really easy for those nonprofits and funders when they onboard to just in 2 clicks, literally, to upload their 990 on the platform for more current years. And it's everyone's incentive to be more current and transparent with that data, especially for the nonprofits who want to see their data visualized in the most up-to-date way because the funders are checking them out. And then for the funders, for them to get the most rich My Portfolio insights, they also would have to have their most up-to-date 990 information in the platform. So it's just a couple of clicks, and then Laurel and our team on the back end take that, use a combo of software and human touch to update that information in just a matter of a couple of days. So that's one way that we get more up to date, and we're seeing folks are really doing it pretty quickly. Then beyond that, we have plans to suck in a lot more data into our system, websites, annual reports, other things like that are going to provide a much richer experience. So imagine when you type in a keyword on an ecosystem, it won't just do the mission statement and the org name, it'll do everything in a 990 plus the scraping of the website to see if there's other key terms that are popping up there. So that's in the plans as well for making this all the more powerful.
That's awesome. I have a couple more questions and observations. And if folks in the crowd have them as well, feel free to chime in. One thing you mentioned a couple times, I was hoping you can maybe elaborate on, is the challenges presented by donor advised funds and also wholesale fiscal sponsors on the other side of things. These are in many ways beneficial for organizations and make lots of cool stuff possible. So I don't want to trash on them too much, but for researchers, they're a headache. Like everybody, even huge proponents of them will agree, very difficult to research the trends. So can you talk a little bit about, just expand on that challenge? You mentioned there's the feature that you can turn them off, which is useful because these funds are huge now, bigger than the other one. So anyway, I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question, and it fits with something that's coming very soon, or at least on our roadmap moving forward, is we are trying to unite the entire philanthropic and impact sector on one platform, which is super, super unique in the sector. So that means getting the folks who are DAF sponsors, who sponsor those specific donor advised funds, and the donor advised fund donors onto Impala, and also those who are fiscally sponsored projects and programs also on Impala. So for example, if you're a fiscally sponsored organization, we already have designs for them to have their own profiles on the platform that would be affiliated with their parent sponsor. So in that way, those potential funders could actually see who's on the come up, who are those, potential future nonprofits that are fiscally sponsored. And so right now, fiscally sponsored projects and programs have no home online. They don't really have digital real estate. They could have their own website, but they don't file their own 990, right? So we're able to actually split out that data in partnership with the sponsor and give them their own digital real estate. So that's on the way. And that's really important on the nonprofit side of the sector. Then on the funder side, we're in lots of amazing conversations and design partnerships with DAF sponsors, and we're going to also be creating profiles for those DAF holders. So after our big launch with the Jewish Funders Network, a big funder network across the world, a lot of individual DAF donors said, I want a profile on Impala as David Fox-Estrin funder. I want to look like a foundation out in the world. So when you search an ecosystem, you'll actually see David's DAF number 1, 2, 3 right there, and I may opt into being fully transparent. And even if 5 or 10% or 2% of DAF holders opt into that transparency, that's a game changer for nonprofits who otherwise would never have known that's, those are potential funders who could support them. So that's number one. Number two, we're also going to be offering, our suite of services to those DAF sponsors as well to enrich the services that they can offer to their DAF donors. But some may choose to be entirely private. You never know that they exist anyways, and that's how things are as is. Some may choose to be anonymous, where you could see it's DAF number 12345. Which is somewhat of a win. And then third, some might choose to be totally transparent, and then you'll be able to see and search them on Impala. So altogether, we're stretching on the funder side, we're stretching on the nonprofit side, bringing everyone into one place, enriching what those nonprofits and funders already get as well. So again, when we talk about democratizing the data, we're trying to walk the walk, not just talk about it. Which
that was very good. I thought that was a challenging question.
We get it often, and also it was a natural thing for us to do. We're very quickly going.
No, those sound very. It's all very interesting, and obviously super relevant for our group. As we're talking along, right, I realized that the talk was focused on grant makers and grant seekers, which is pretty much everybody who engages with us is doing one or the other, often both. So that's great. But I was thinking about how it would be great if other aspects of society were using this. And I thought, so in particular, journalists, right, people who write articles about issues or even business stories could be doing this sort of stuff. I read a lot of news, and it seems to me very often that very clearly the journalist did not bother to pull a bunch of 990s, right, when writing the story, had a deadline or whatever, and that it could have been enriched by doing that level of research. Also, teachers, I myself hear from teachers a lot who want to teach their kids about nonprofits. Do I have lesson plans and things like that for them? And then just civic leaders, church leaders, people who are trying to improve their communities and learn about programs, other interested individuals. Everything that you showed was today geared towards seeking and making. Do you have any general civic research tools, or do you think about those other folks at all?
Well, I can tell you that I love that you figured out that piece of this is also helpful for some other folks. So we have had a not insignificant number of journalists reach out to us. We see them on our platform. Cool. There's often, for a variety of reasons, you might want to see where the money's going. And this is a really helpful way to visualize that and get access to that information. So we've seen a number of journalists, and we think that would be, a really great use case. So we've got some leads on some folks that we think should be aware of this. But if you have folks in mind, definitely let them know. Teachers as well. I think that thinking about the next generation is really important, especially as this ginormous transfer of wealth is about to happen. I think it's important that a tool like Impala is arriving at around the same time as this transfer is going to occur. So, if I were a philanthropist, I'm a very small philanthropist. We all can be, but I would want to use a tool like Impala to check out those, it's Giving Tuesday time, right? End of year. Well, I'm probably going to go on Impala and take a look at the nonprofits that I might send $50 to or $1,000 to. And I can take a look here. Why should it just be a mega foundation who's taking a look at this? It'd be really great if we all had a culture of sort of due diligence to make sure our money is going to the right place.
Wouldn't it be great? Yeah. And for folks who want to do that diligence, this is a really key tool. You can focus it down in your city, you can see all of the nonprofits in your city, what they're doing, what their funding gaps are, who's funding them, all that. I think if you live in a place, you should probably do that for the place that you live in, so you know those things, right? Whether you're a significant funder or seeker or not. So just one final program. So another group of folks for whom this is obviously quite useful is reviewers of grant proposals, and you are the partnerships director. So specifically, one you mentioned, right, folks on the call and folks evaluating can take advantage of the services over this summer. If you'll give me a link to that or whatever, I'll make sure we pass that along, and that'll be really great. You also mentioned at one point, right, that this is integratable with some CRMs. And I think down the road, it might be neat to make this so that if you're in the matrix reviewing, you can look up both the group being reviewed and the funder that they applied to while you're doing their review. Is that possible? Is that something we can do?
Yeah, I mean, that's the direction that we want to head. We don't yet have integrations with other CRMs, but for now, what you can do is you can build a list, whether it's nonprofit list, funder list, or a combo, and then you can export that information and then bring that into a CRM that you may already have. That's already doable. We didn't want to
here's our list of funders. We could easily be here's their Impala profiles.
Yeah, so you may let's say you've got 20 or 50 or 100 nonprofits that apply to the next round to be reviewed, you might be able to say, hey, everyone is linked right on this list. You share it with them. Folks are affiliated with the Unfunded List account on Impala, and then they're able to take a look at everyone's Impala profiles, part of their evaluation process. I mean, imagine a world where every nonprofit is applying with just one click, sending their Impala profile to a funder to insert all the information that they need on their grant application, and everyone's spending less time filling in grant seeking forms and only answering maybe one or two questions that are relevant to a thing, to an application. That's where we're heading.
Certainly it's useful even in a less utopic world than that.
Yeah, otherwise it's log this thing, click around a little bit.
You've exhausted all of my questions, and there was a thorough presentation there. Yeah, if anybody else has any comments or things to ask,
now would be the time. Up. We still have a handful of folks here, so if anyone else has either a question, comment, or just a vibe check on how this has resonated with you.
At some point, David will find a very good spot to cut. And we have some really cool outro music that gets played, perhaps now, perhaps right over this. That's what we're going to store. Hey, thank you again, David, and Laurel as well for your assistance, and other David for recording. 3 Davids is what it took to bring this session to you today, a record for Unfunded List. Anyway, very cool to see you. Our next session is in an hour, 3 p.m. With my mom, talking about a donation she recently made to a museum. So take an hour-long break, stretch your legs, maybe make a grant, right? Or submit one. Do some research, wherever you want. The hour's yours. See some of you at 3 p.m. Thanks again, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
Bye.
Thanks, Margaret. Bye.